Welcome, everyone. This is the September 21st Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel meeting. It is being done as a webcast due to the current public health pandemic. Just a couple of reminders before we actually get going to the meeting itself. This meeting is being recorded. The recording will be made available on the panel website later this week. Also, the website will include meeting presentations from tonight and other meeting materials as needed. We're using Microsoft Teams simply because that is what Vermont Agency of Digital Services is recommending that we use for large meetings such as this. People joining the meeting are initially in a listen-only mode. At times when you wish to speak, number one, we ask you to self-mute. The way you mute is, I'm just going to jump to a different picture here for the moment. You see this little microphone icon. If you click on that, a negation sign will go through there that will indicate that you are muted. If there is no negation sign here, then you are unmuted. If you are tied in via a phone line for the audio, you need to press *6 to mute and unmute. I am told there is a little announcement in there that says when you're muted and unmuted. So do keep that in mind. Okay, moving on to interact with the panel. We also have, there's a little raise hand feature, which is being monitored. So if you do have a question, if you do want to speak, you can use this little raise hand icon here that will send a notice to me and to my several technical assistants here that you do wish to speak, and we will get to you as soon as we can. Another option right next to this is we have a little chat function which will send messages pretty much out to anyone joined in the meeting, but we have people monitoring that as well, and we can take messages that way. You also have, I am monitoring my email coming in, so if you do have a question, you're unable to reach me any other way, send me a quick email. It will pop up on my screen, so I will know that a message is coming in. Other than that, we have a number of comment periods during the meeting. Some are specific to particular agenda items. We ask people to try to respect that. That some of the comment periods are, there are two general comment periods that when most people will speak. Just one warning, depending on your own internet connection, when you do unmute yourself, there may be a slight delay. My experience is it's maybe 1 to 2 seconds at the very most. We did have a number of pre-registrants wishing to speak. During the comment periods, we will call folks out individually on that, and we will try to manage that as best we can. And I think everything else I've already mentioned on here. You can send messages to the psd.ndcap@vermont.gov address to send a written question that way. You can also send, like I said previously, you can send through the chat. And at several times, we will just ask for any additional verbal comments and keep the lines open as much as we can. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to the panel chair, Josh Unruh. So Josh, you are go at throttle up.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everybody that's joined us tonight. We have a very long agenda, and as Tony mentioned, we have several people that are looking to speak during public comments. We also have some panelists that have asked for time in the beginning. So what I'm going to ask that everybody does throughout the course of this meeting is, if you are participating as a public comment, please keep your comments to 2 minutes. If you have any additional information outside of those 2 minutes or additional things that you would like to talk about, I'd appreciate if you email that to Tony, and the panel will get back with you. We'll share that with the entire panel and provide feedback, and that will also be available on the website. But hopefully we can, you guys can get everything that you need to say out in that 2-minute period, because there are so many folks that want to speak tonight. As Anthony mentioned, there's about 20 people that want to speak. And I'm sure there's additional ones that we haven't even touched yet. So that's about an hour of public comments as it is. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm not going to do an introduction of panelists because it's almost impossible to do. You can find the list of panelists on our website. So we will move forward with the review and approval of the May 4th meeting minutes. And I'm looking for a motion from a panel member.
This is Sarah Coffey. I move that we approve the minutes of May 4th.
Kyle Bleacher, I second that.
Okay, so I need to get an all in favor, and please, when you say your name and what your vote is, yay or nay.
Lisa Weinman, yay.
David Pearson, yay.
Madeline Arms, yay.
Bob Leach, yay.
Emily Davis, yay.
Chris Campany, yay.
Sarah Coffey, yay.
Josh Unruh, yay.
Bill Irwin, aye.
June Tierney, yay.
Chuck Schwer, yay.
Is Corey Daniels on the line? I know he was here earlier.
Corey Daniels, yay.
Okay, I think that takes care of everybody's, from what I can see, correct?
Yes.
All right. Very good. So we will move forward with the NorthStar update on the VY site decommissioning activities. Corey Daniels and/or Dave Pearson, go ahead when you're ready.
Can everyone see the slide?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Corey Daniels, ESVISI Senior Manager at NorthStar. You can go ahead and skip to the next slide, Tony. All right, we always start our presentation off with this slide. You'll see it again a little later in the presentation. Our simple priorities have not shifted. Our intentions are always to do the job right, and usually that means doing it slow and careful. So far, we've been able to uphold that standard, but it is sincere, and with all efforts, radiological, environmental, industrial, and nuclear safety are taken into account at the preparation, execution, and review of every job. Next slide. For a performance update, we still have had 0 OSHA recordable lost time accidents to date since the start of the project. That's over 500,000 person hours worked on site since January 11th of 2019. Doesn't mean we've been perfect, but overall we've had good performance with respect to safety. Most of that's selecting a good crew, maintaining strong engagement, people understanding the jobs that are in front of them, having them well planned, and performing them safely. Our regulatory performance remains good. We've had no cited or non-cited violations. We just recently had an inspection of our security for the ISFISI and the remainder of the site. We expect 0 violations out of that as well. Production overall, we're on track, a little ahead in some areas, a little behind in the reactor project removal, but it's a big project, and over the course of the 6 years or so we think it will take to connect the work, we believe we're advancing out of our initial projections. Next slide, please, Tony. All right, project schedule overview. For those of you who continue to visit us during these presentations, I've had a couple of requests to put some granularity to this project schedule slide, which we've tried to do. We're going to share the timeline with a little more detail. Without reading all the items to you, what I would recommend you understand as you look at this is, because of the size of this project and the amount of coordination between the activities, this is a tool we will use as we conduct the project, but it doesn't mean it will go perfectly as written on paper. And we've seen that in many aspects of the job, depending on the types of equipment, the teams, and the resources and materials, even the changes we've made with prevention and mitigation for our strategy managing the COVID-19, the small teams that we've broken up, and the way we're doing the work. There will be some adjustments as we go through the project, but this gives a little bigger picture with the detail that I think folks are looking for the different major jobs that are going to occur as part of the decommissioning. And again, I'm going to go through these slides, and if there are questions at the end, we'll come back and revisit it. So I'm not going to try to over-explain or read this all to you. Next slide, please. Right, this slide's fairly familiar, at least with the graphic and the arrows underneath showing the general progression of activities that are required to take apart a reactor vessel. Along the left, you can see we are now down to the guide tubes. These are the actual housings that the control rod guides lived in, and then the core plate is actually in process as well for being segmented. Those are the major components that are currently being affected on the refuel floor. The upper core grid is now sitting in baskets in our spent fuel pool, ready to be packaged and placed into the proper storage. We will eventually place it out on the ISFISI pad as greater than Class C waste. Next slide, please. Okay. You got one ahead of me, Tony. Thank you. So, hard to tell exactly what's happening in a number of these. You can see people working above the reactor core in the upper left-hand corner. To the right, you can actually see the nozzle coming out of the left side of the picture and the high-pressure water jet system cutting one of the core grid segments. On the bottom left-hand corner, you can see one of our underwater saws cutting through one of the control rod guide tube tabs so the bolts can be removed and the guide tubes themselves can be pulled out. And then in the bottom, you can see they're placing one of the pieces of equipment into a basket. Next slide, please. A little more detail after that saw gets done removing those tabs. We actually put an underwater hydraulic nut splitter on and we break those bolts off. And you can see a small grapple grabbing one of those nuts or a piece of one of those nuts and lifting it. And in the bottom right-hand corner is basically a can placed in underwater where we were collecting all those bolts. So that's the level of detail that the underwater work is happening in 40 feet of water right on top of the reactor vessel assembly components. Next slide, please. So those control rod guide tubes, and you can see in the far left picture a mechanism that we actually use to grab hold of the inside and eventually latch a little bit of the outside of one of those tubes. That gets turned about, it's really about 120 degrees. It gets spun and then it unlatches and they're able to be slid out of the space in which they house. They're about 12 feet long. and those are being removed. And that sequence just shows the part coming all the way out of its hole. And there's 89 of those, and we're most of the way through them now. Next slide, please. So ancillary to the guide tubes being removed, and those guide tubes will be cut up and stacked, nested actually into containers. There's much vessel segmentation support activities that happen. For instance, in these photos, you see them removing a filter pump assembly, pulling it apart, and conducting maintenance on it so they can continue to maintain a high degree of water quality that supports the activities going on in the reactor vessel. Next slide, please. All right. Along with the work that's happening on the refit floor, significant progress is being made in the turbine building and the steam plant demolition. You're going to see a few photos here, and while they look relatively boring and the rooms look large and empty, that is in fact because all the equipment has been isolated and removed, and much of it has been shipped off site. So these turbine building photos you're going to see are really demonstrating the absence of equipment and material. And if you've ever been inside the plant or seen the steam plant components inside the turbine building, you know just how tight and busy those spaces normally are. And this will demonstrate how much has come out of those buildings. Next slide, please. On the left-hand side, you can see a worker on a lift cutting through a large piece of steam pipe. And on the right-hand side, also cutting a condensate line, which is right up next to the condenser. So these pipes and the amount of materials inside the building are normally very full and busy. This is nearing the end of them emptying out these spaces. Next slide, please. A little different view. The large steam pipes that connect from the reactor vessel to the main turbine have all been cut out of the turbine building. Those last few pipes that you see on that left-hand side are now removed, and that whole upper area, that shelf where the large forward main steam lines used to reside, are all gone. Next slide, please. A few more shots of the heater bay, especially the east side where all the feed heaters and the majority of the steam piping and condensate and feed piping used to reside. It's all been emptied out. A large amount of the fire protection equipment and connections to emergency cooling systems in the middle upper picture have been removed. On the upper right-hand side, the turbine building south, a large amount of components and service and instrument air systems, associated condensate and demineralizer control panels and operational systems have all been pulled. On the bottom left-hand side, you can see more system equipment removal. On the last two slides show the large containers for which we're stacking the materials in and staging and prepping them for shipment by rail. Next slide, please. All right, the photo on the left, you're actually looking into a large vaulted area that was inside the advanced off-gas building. On the bottom, below the blue sling that's hanging, you can see the small pedestals. There were 7 adsorber vessels, all about 20 feet tall in that room. And we're down to basically removing just the last one. And the picture on the right shows that last vessel coming out of that building and being lifted by a crane between the advanced off-gas building and the containment access building, so it could be staged for removal by rail as well. Next slide, please. Thank you, Tony. So this is a repeat slide from the last meeting. Those 2 large structures, the one on the left was the main warehouse, which is the majority of the building on the far left-hand side. And then the maintenance office structures, those we had all scheduled for demolition. The building in the middle on the right that's also circled, that is the advanced off-gas building. That's a large concrete structure, about 50 feet tall, and a significant amount of concrete in it. Next slide, please. You can see the beginning of the demolition of the warehouse and the office structures with the large excavator. Next slide. That building went down pretty rapidly. They pretty much had it all the way on the ground within the first 3 days, and all the way to the load-bearing structures and the walls we determined would remain within the third day, and most of the material had been separated and removed over the course of the next week or so following that. Next slide, please. So, similar scene shot, but the entire warehouse and the construction office building is gone. I draw your attention to the far right-hand side of the slide. And now you can see the advanced off-gas building, the large concrete structure. Next slide, please. So this is the AOG structure during demolition. The entire structure was free-released, and we determined that all the materials inside were skid-mounted and removable, and they had all been pulled out. So we were down to just the large concrete building with all the rebar in it. Next slide, please. Right, to get an idea of just how hard it is to get through this building, the walls near the bottom of this are about 7 feet thick, and most of the rebar in it is 2 inches. You get an idea for the size of the machine that is being put to use to rubbleize the structure. We actually have to build a ramp up to get the right angle of attack with that large hammer. And we actually use the rubble from the material to make a pedestal for the machines to drive up onto to continue to do the deconstruction of the remainder of the structure. Next slide, please. And there you can see a couple of the vehicle barrier system concrete blocks. They look like they're underneath of that large excavator. They're actually to the left of it. But just to the right of that, you can see the rubble piled up, and that excavator is on top of it, reaching into the structure. Next slide, please. All right, so this is standing at ground level, looking up over the pile of rebar and the remainder of the building. This project was scheduled out for about 100 days. We expected right around 200 truckloads of material to remove all the rubble from this. Next slide. And at any given point, we could have 3 or 4 machines working in concert with each other to both hog the material out of the way, set it up as a pedestal for additional reach, or removal of the material and operation of the large hammers. Next slide. So along with all that deconstruction and that work with AOG actually is being bested from our initial schedule projections by a little bit. So we're doing well on that. Material transportation operations have been ongoing. On the far right, I mentioned those 7 large absorber beds. That's a picture of one of them being loaded into a rail car. Custom boxes, which you may have seen photos of before, those are built specifically to house much of the reactor vessel internal materials. And then the bottom photo on the left is actually a small collage. You can see a small resin vessel being lifted up, loaded into that center photo, which is a red waste cask used for shipment, which is being closed up in the right-hand side of that collage. Next slide, please. Just to catch us up, and this data was fresh as of 2 weeks ago. We still are shipping between 3 to almost 5 rail cars a week, getting about 14 shipments out per month. I think the number is closer to 190 now, but shipments to date, as of 2 weeks ago, is 191 shipments, and just about 20,000 pounds of material have left the site. So we've upgraded some of our rail cars to use for this materials and the types of containers that we're shipping. We've employed a few more rail cars to make sure that we have good turnaround time, because it's a pretty long journey to Texas and back. And overall, we're keeping up very good with the amount of material that we're creating on site, so none of it's aggregating or being allowed to pile up anywhere in the facility. Next slide, please. We made quite a bit of progress with our state agency counterparts. The Agency of Natural Resources and their consultants have reviewed our reports, which was submitted at the beginning of the year. All the comments have been received and adjustments have been made. The final addendum has been issued. There are 3 corrective action plans that have been through public noticing and they're approved and ready to execute. We're waiting for the right time to do those. Those are really small, previously identified issues where diesel fuel or another soil contaminant was found, and we will disposition those sites generally in the order of removing a small amount of soil and hauling it away and then checking the margins to make sure that no other materials remain that shouldn't be there. Next slide, please. We've done multiple rounds of groundwater sampling, 7 rounds quarterly. We found no anomalies or new source terms. That's a good story. We don't expect to be surprised at the site, but having the material and the information from the data collection match exactly what we believe exists on the site is an important step for us having confidence with our remediation strategy. We removed the 75,000 gallon fuel storage tank that was for the emergency systems for the plant that are no longer necessary. That tank resided just in front of the advanced off-gas structure that is being demolished. And our next groundwater sampling round is planned for November. We'll coordinate that with our state agency counterparts. Our annual report was submitted in April. It's been approved. We've also conducted a risk evaluation, which is required by the newer portion of the I rule. That is currently with the state agencies for review. And really that risk evaluation just looks at all the individual contaminants or non-radiological constituents that we find and make sure we consider them in their aggregate such that although they may be far less than any regulatory requirement, they don't get compiled together and create a different or ununderstood hazard. Next slide, please. We're additionally gone through all the buildings and checked all the coatings. They've all been evaluated. We haven't found any additional materials that we need to dispose of as hazardous waste. We have recently modified our potable water system to supply the water that is used by the plant. We're in the same well that supplies the public service building. That was due to some naturally occurring uranium that we found in that original well that supplied the plant. It was very close to the Vermont limit of 20 parts per picocurie, for which we were concerned that we could end up with 4 quarterly average samples going over that limit. So in order to avoid having to install a treatment system for a well and water supply that's about to go away, we instead modified that supply to be shared from the public service building supply, which has historically seen little to no uranium numbers in it of concern and would not require us to put a system in to conduct any cleanup of that water before use. So that was installed and commissioned actually over this weekend. We continue to collaborate with the Vermont A&R and the DEC on our bi-weekly calls. We had one today. And the dewatering permit will be in public comment at a meeting tomorrow. Next slide, please. If you have been to the site recently, you would see a number of changes, including the fences being removed from parts of the owner-controlled area, the large vehicle barrier system, 20 to 50 ton concrete blocks being removed and relocated. And next slide, please. You would also see some of the initial security operating for the owner-controlled area buildings have now been removed, and their fencings and controls have also been eliminated. Next slide, Tony. And you would see a fresh coat of blacktop on the road, not only coming into the site, but also on Governor Hunt Road, where it attaches to 142, as we continue to monitor that with the town and help maintain the quality of that roadway with the extra traffic it's incurring as a result of the decommissioning. We also resurfaced the rail crosswalk. It was a safety improvement. We don't have to remove the little grates every time we run the rail car past the building there. And that will help quite a bit with the logistics for getting all those train cars in and out. Next slide, please. All right, so there's the same picture we started with. And now with a little context, you can see clearly what it is. It's actually the advanced off-gas building being demolished by some large machines. But again, our commitment to target zero and doing it right and doing it safe, we followed through with that, and we plan to continue to do so with the project. So hopefully, Tony, I'm staying under the time limit, and I'll pause there for any questions or comments.
Did we lose Josh somewhere along the line?
You unmute Josh, so you can't hear him.
Yeah. Well, the next item we have on the agenda before questions and answers is actually the state agency's presentation. So, okay, there's Josh. Josh, can you hear us now?
I sure can. It looks like Corey Williams had a question for, or sorry, Chris Williams had a question for Corey. Can you tell us more about the more details about the June 19th accident involving an empty cask on the way to VY?
Again, I'm not sure what level of detail you're looking for, but basically we had an empty canister, a Rano's subcontractor delivery service, working with appropriate state agencies for the routing of that material, was sending that canister to the site for use on the site, and unfortunately got on a roadway that was under some significant construction. The truck, which was a mini axle truck and a heavy load, got its right tires into some softer material along the ditch, and the vehicle and the trailer slowly rolled all the way over onto its right hand side. Nobody was injured. The equipment did incur some cosmetic damage. Overall, a 400-ton crane and an additional truck and trailer were dispatched over the course of the next 24 to 30 hours or so. That equipment was righted and transferred to a new truck and trailer. It was delivered to the site. We made multiple notifications, including to the NRC, although it was not required because we thought it might get some press just due to the size and type of load it was. And ultimately, that piece of equipment has since been inspected, tested through Orano's quality assurance program, validated that it can be used, and its integrity from paperwork and quality assurance standpoint has been restored. But again, that equipment had never been used prior to that event having occurred, and it was ultimately delivered to the site safely. Does that answer your question?
Chris Williams, are you all set?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just wondering how it was that the load had a police escort, and how are they escorted into a construction zone? And then my final question would be, why wasn't this shipped by rail, since you've been using rail so much?
I don't know if I can answer with full confidence the first part of your question. It's not uncommon for what's called a super load to have a police escort. The routing of it And the state agencies involved for sending it down a road with the construction, I think, are still part of the learnings that are being gathered from that. Why it was not shipped by rail, I don't have an answer for. It was likely the shipping expectations made by our subcontractor through the trucking arrangement that it could be easily provided to the site on a truck. But I don't have an answer beyond that as to why it didn't come by rail.
Okay, so the state is still investigating?
I can't answer for the state. I don't know if the state is still investigating. What I said was I believe that is still part of the learnings that they're gathering as to how collectively the state agencies in the process for letting a supersized load end up on a small highway that had construction occurred.
Right. Okay, well, I'll be inquiring with some of the state agencies to see if we can get answers. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it looks like we have two more questions for Corey. Ann Darling's question is about the reference on slide 25 of 400 curries.
Go ahead, Ann. What's your question?
I wanted to know what it meant. It said something about total activity 400 curies. I don't know what that means.
So Ann, a curie is a measure of activity. It's a standard unit to describe how much radioactivity is contained by the materials associated with it. So it's just a running total that we try to keep so we understand how much of the material being shipped off site contains radioactivity and how much of it leaves.
Okay, so all the stuff that's been shipped or up to the time the slide was made for August, that was how many curies of radioactivity?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
I see several more questions regarding Corey's presentation, but I want to try to keep to the agenda. So when we get to the point where we're looking for public comments and panel comments, Chris, I see something from you as well, a question regarding stormwater permits on the panel. We'll get to that once we get to the public comments and questions on those and the panel comments and questions on those, just so we don't get too far off track because we have a very long meeting and several people that want to speak. So we'll keep so now I'd look to the Public Service Department for their report.
Go ahead, Eric. You're still on mute, or I don't know, Commissioner. Are you making a presentation?
No, I'm doing the presentation, Tony. I was just hoping that our presentation would get pulled up on the window here.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Eric Guzman. I'm a staff attorney with the Department of Public Service. Joining me on the call are our consultants from 4 Points Group, Nicholas Kapik and Mark Meir. They serve as both our financial and technical consultants for this decommissioning process. Next slide, please. Just a brief summary of the department's role for those who aren't already familiar with it. The department has both a financial and technical oversight role for the decommissioning process. Under the financial role, the department and its consultants review the financial performance of the project and analyze the financial health of NorthStar. Under the technical role, the department confirms the work that is performed by NorthStar in relation to the Site Restoration Trust and Nuclear Decommissioning Trust withdrawals. The project, the department also evaluates any risks or concerns that could challenge the successful completion of the project by its intended timeline. The department receives monthly summaries from confidential monthly summaries from NorthStar. These are pursuant to the Memorandum of Understanding under Section 2F from the docket 8880. These are reviewed by the department and its consultants, as well as requests for disbursements from the Site Restoration Trust. The department meets with NorthStar monthly just to follow up on reporting and correct any or address any sort of questions or concerns from those documents. The department's consultant also conducts regular site visits to verify the work that's being reported is in fact completed. And the publicly available information the department receives is uploaded onto the NDCAP website. Next slide, Tony. Thank you. For the technical updates, the department's consultant was able to conduct a site visit this past July. The typical site visits that are consistently conducted were delayed due to COVID since February. However, our consultant did view the site in July and found that the conditions observed during the visit were consistent with the project reported by NorthStar in their April, May, June, and July 2020 status report. And NorthStar had, within the site visit report, NorthStar has acted consistent with Governor Scott's executive order to reduce COVID-19 risks. Based on the financial documents the department has received to date, the latest approved schedule by NorthStar for decommissioning of the project, the department and its consultants find that the estimated work completed is reasonable with available financial resources and is on course to complete the project. The next slide, Tony. And just since the last NDCAP meeting, these are the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust disbursements on a monthly basis that we've received notification of, as well as the Site Restoration Trust disbursements. As of 8/31, the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust balance is roughly at $389.5 million, and the Site Restoration Trust balance was roughly $64 million. And any disbursements that NorthStar has received are for work that has already been completed. All right. Next slide, Tony. Thank you. And this is just a overview of the trust balances. These are available on the NDCAP website, but these are balances since April 30th, just for reference. And that is a very brief update, but the general takeaway is based on the department's financial and technical oversight. We're satisfied thus far with the work and progress that's been completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. We will move on to the Agency of Natural Resources.
Okay, hello, I'm Gerald Noyes. I work for the Agency of Natural Resources Waste Management Division, and I'm one of the project managers for this. The Waste Management and Prevention Division, we're state oversight for non-nuclear contamination on the site. This is a large site, industrial site. There are multiple fuel oil tanks that were on site. There were transformers which contain transformer oil, and a number of these things were identified in the initial site investigations and also the environmental site assessment as AOCs, areas of concern. And our role is to kind of oversee those, the remediation of those items. Next slide, please. We have regular communications between Department of Health, Public Service Board, NorthStar, and Haley and Aldridge. Haley and Aldridge is doing the environmental work, the non-nuclear environmental work. We also have public comments are solicited through the draft permit process for draft permits and corrective action plans. They are posted on the environmental notice board. We also use the NDCAP meetings for public communication. And then NorthStar and the ANR both maintain public information websites. Next slide, please. Like the previous presenter said, some of the site visits have been curtailed. We did have 2 site visits, ANR and Department of Health, and this was from June, where we met with some of the stormwater people, Bill Irwin for Department of Health and Tony Lashinsky. And the visits were restricted due to the COVID travel restrictions as the state employees, also NorthStar trying to keep their site as isolated as possible from the COVID risk. Next slide, please. NorthStar is required to follow the state investigation and remediation of contaminated properties procedure. It's a big property, but they're still following that procedure, and that is started with environmental site assessments, then a site investigation, and then finally a supplemental site investigation, which kind of did sampling to fill in any questions on the previous investigations. The first supplemental site investigation was received in January, and it updated the initial investigation. A lot of soil sampling, groundwater sampling for fuel oil contaminants, solvents, total petroleum hydrocarbons. These are all things that can often be found at large industrial facilities. You have vehicles on site that get maintained. You have backup heating systems using oil. You have solvents that are used to clean parts in machine shops. All of this is kind of generally typical for a large industrial site like Vermont Yankee, and that's why these things were being investigated. The supplemental site investigation did not find anything significant new from those things that were previously identified. Just again, filled in some of the holes on the previous investigation. Next slide. Next slide, Tony. as I said, we refined the degree and extent of the previously identified contamination, and that information is being used to develop the corrective action plans for the individual areas of contamination which were identified. The supplemental site investigation report was reviewed by both the DEC and ATC Group Services, which is a technical support contractor for the DEC. And then we sent the comments to Haley and Aldridge. Haley and Aldridge revised the reports based on those comments and questions, and sent us a revised report back to us, and then that was approved in August of 2020. Next slide. Tony, next, there we go. Also part of the site investigation is groundwater sampling. There were a large number of groundwater monitor wells installed over the years, also to investigate the previous tritium leak. Those wells have been able to be repurposed to investigate the site for potential contaminants such as fuel oil and other contaminants to the groundwater. In 2019, we had 4 rounds of groundwater monitoring, and then they produced a annual report. We approved that annual report in July. There's since been 2 more quarterly rounds of monitoring. Some low-level areas of groundwater contamination were found near the previously identified areas of contamination. These were, there was a transformer fire in the main transformer, and firefighting foam was used in that, and there was some PFAS was found, the perfluorinated alkyls firefighting foam. There were some fuel oil related compounds near the backup diesel generator underground storage tank, although this was lower level dissolved in the groundwater, not actual free product. Manganese is above the groundwater enforcement standard in a number of areas. Manganese is a naturally occurring compound, but it is rather high in some parts and have not yet demonstrated that it is in fact naturally occurring on the site and wasn't a result of some activities that perhaps released the manganese that was on site in the rock, in the soil. So, but further investigation will go on to find out if that's the case or whether it is naturally occurring. Next slide. As Corey said previously, we did not find any large areas of groundwater contamination for non-radiological compounds. No big spills have been identified. This has been verified. We used ATC to split samples where they went out with Haley and Aldridge during the groundwater sampling rounds, and they collected samples and sent them off to another lab. And those split samples basically verified what Haley and Aldridge was saying, that there wasn't, they were verifying those results. Quarterly sampling continues. It was performed in May and August, and as Corey said, again, another one will happen in November. You can go to the next slide, Tony. Haley and Aldridge has been doing work for NorthStar. As Corey said, they submitted a non-radiological data evaluation report, and that's to evaluate a risk assessment or evaluate data for a risk assessment purposes. The agency, the DEC, and has it, and ATC has also been asked to look at it, and we're in the process of reviewing that work. groundwater interception system has been installed, and the permit applications have been permits have been applied for, and those are going to go into I think the public comment, or they're in public comment, and the public meeting for that is happening, I believe, tomorrow night. They're also working on the water supplies, or the drinking water wells, because of the trace of finding uranium in one of the wells, and they rearranging some of the water supply so that the buildings can have potable water. Next slide, please. As Corey said previously, the corrective action plans for 3 areas of contamination were submitted. They've been sent through public comment and approved. They were all for contaminated soil from the south warehouse, the shipping and receiving building, and the east cooling tower. And these contaminants were oil from vehicle maintenance, fuel oil from storage tanks, and transformer cooling oil. Next slide, please. And these corrective action plans will be carried out. They've been approved. No comments were received from the public, and they will be carried out basically at a time that fits in with the demolition schedule of the buildings. And then the soil will be appropriately disposed of. Next slide. The ANR is reviewing various items. So we have the groundwater discharge permit, and the Department of Health had some input on that to develop testing criteria. And these permits are now out for public comment. The ANR and the Department of Health, as well as ATC, will be reviewing the risk assessment report. Next slide. In ongoing work, there's all building demolition has to have asbestos abatement done prior. A lot of that asbestos abatement has occurred. We've had ATC on site doing abatement observations, checking paperwork, looking at the work practices to make sure that it is following Vermont asbestos rules, the Department of Health asbestos rules. There was a DOH, Department of Health asbestos inspector, also completed a site inspection. ATC has been on site multiple times and hasn't reported any significant anomalies. Again, building material characterization is also occurring for things like lead paint and potentially hazardous coatings on some of the materials, and they have not been found at levels that make these materials hazardous waste. Next slide. So our technical support contractor, ATC, will be continuing to provide their evaluations of Haley and Aldrich submitted reports and work plans. They recently were requested, and they're going to help us review the data for the non-radiological data evaluation report. They're going to continue with split sampling, continue with the ongoing asbestos work to compare results, or to compare, conditions with what was being reported, and to observe work practices. Next slide. And our future work basically is to continue doing what we are doing, is we're reviewing work plans, environmental permits, disposal documents, sample results, corrective action plans, site remediation, and anything else submitted by Haley and Aldridge or NorthStar. We'll be using our technical support contractor for asbestos abatement, split sampling, submittal reviews, and anything else really that we can think of that we feel that we might need help with on that. TEC is going to continue with site visits and teleconferences to observe progress, participate in these meetings, and that kind of ends my presentation of the DEC role in this process. And I can open it. Any questions if we have the time for that, or later.
We're going to hold questions until we get to that portion of the agenda, which isn't too far away. The next part of the agenda, the Department of Health, their presentation, please.
Yes, good evening. So everything was going really well in Vermont in a lot of ways, including our inspection and oversight of Vermont Yankee until COVID-19 came. COVID-19 is, of course, our department's #1 priority for every employee. I'm currently working as the Health and Medical Branch Director at the State Emergency Operations Center, and working that full-time job as well as my regular full-time job. Still, we've had some opportunities to participate meaningfully in the oversight of Vermont Yankee, especially with regard to our partnership with Department of Environmental Conservation. Specifically, as mentioned previously, we have calls every other Monday, and these have been very fruitful. Fruitful, especially because we have had periodic site inspections. Until March, we were doing those every 2 weeks for the health department. Since then, we've only been able to go down twice, but each of those inspections has been very informative. In particular, as you saw with the presentation from Corey Daniels, all of those images that you saw there, we've had an opportunity to see those as well up close and at the site, and obviously to ask questions and to dig deeper into the circumstances there. The other things that we're working with DEC on include a special discharge permit relative to bringing water out of the ground prior to its interaction with any of the buildings. In particular, they're going to be using extraction wells on the west side of the Connecticut of the plant that will on the west side of the turbine building, so that these intercept wells can pull water out of the ground prior to going under or into the turbine building, where it could be contaminated with contaminants inside there prior to shipping. We've worked on some discharge limits, not limits, but actually discharge measurements values that would be useful for us to understand that the water is clean prior to discharge. At the same time, we've been following some COVID-19 cases that occurred there on site. The facility did an excellent job isolating the cases in contact, working with not only the state of Vermont Health Department, but also other states, because these individuals who were found and tested positive were actually from out of state. And lastly, we've been following the shipments of radioactive waste. Every shipment that goes off site, we are made aware of the activity, the date, time, and we share that with law enforcement throughout the state, so that if there's ever, as well as other responders, is in case there is some sort of an incident that might occur and we need to respond. So that's my report from the Department of Health, and can take any questions along with others when that time arises. Thank you.
Okay, looks like we are at the point where we have panel Q&A for the NorthStar and state reports. Chris, I see that you have your hand raised on something, so I will start with you and go for it whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks. So Corey, I know that we've got the hearing tomorrow night on the stormwater discharge, or I mean the groundwater discharge permit. What's the status of the stormwater application with the state?
Corey, you may need
Chris,
to
we're
unmute.
still working with the state agency on the stormwater application, but we don't need it currently. The water management on site is easily handled. We have significant available volume to store water. So we'll work through those details, and it is not impeding or preventing any progress from a decommissioning standpoint or a cost perspective.
Just a quick follow-up. And Bill, so the Department of Health, am I understanding basically the Department of Health is supporting the provisions in the groundwater discharge application?
Yeah, Chris, we have actually had a significant amount of cooperation with the Department of Environmental Conservation in the writing of the permit and its appendices, not specifically to write it, but to review and to make sure that what we thought was appropriate for radiological considerations was included. In particular, we included some concentrations of radionuclides that we thought, should they be measured in the reservoir prior to discharge, an investigation should be made to determine why we saw concentrations above those limits. Not that it's a stop or a no-go forever, but we just want to make sure we understand why, and also then make a thoughtful decision about what the next steps would be.
Chris, did that answer your question?
Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, the next panel member that I see have their hands up is Sarah Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Eric from the Public Service Department. Eric, I'm wondering, my question is about the finances, and I know that you have shown us in your presentation how things are being spent from the Decommissioning Trust Fund. From your perspective, how is that lining up with what remains in the fund and what remains as the amount of work to do? This is coming from a place of wondering, is that decommissioning fund going to last us? And what tools are you using to assess that?
Yeah, so I think that the, as I stated, the project as progress is being measured in comparison to what the fund balances are every month. Our consultants do evaluate that and do check to ensure that funds will be available, and there are financial assurances years out from now to ensure that the project is completed. I know that Nick and Mark are on the call. If you have anything to add to Sarah's question, that might be helpful.
Yeah, this is Nick. Obviously, we're still pretty early in the process, but we looked at both the long-term schedule, where they are in that schedule, and the fund expenditure profile for the entire project. Corey noted earlier that from NorthStar's perspective, they think they're ahead of schedule. We might concur with that. There are still some big projects we undertaken, and we're still watching for scope that hasn't been identified yet. But so far, it's on track.
and everything looked positive.
Okay, I know that we'll continue to, that's one of the reasons why we have these meetings, is to get that sense. So thank you very much.
Sure.
I'm good, Josh.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised for panel members. Panel members, I assume you're all set at this point. If you are not, please unmute right now and let me know. All right, hearing nothing, we will go to public questions. And it looks like I will start with Deb Katz. She had her hand raised first.
Hi, can you hear me this time? I know last time you had trouble hearing me. So
We can hear you just fine, Deb.
Great. So I have a couple of questions about waste, both high level and low level waste. At Yankee Row, they sent to Barnwell, South Carolina in low level waste about 147,000 curies of waste to be put in that dump. Row has about 42 million curies of high level waste sitting on a pad in Row, Massachusetts, actually where I live. What I would like, if you can give it to me, is an estimate of the amount of waste in low-level waste you intend to ship out to Texas, and the estimate of the amount of high-level waste that's sitting on the pad in Vernon. There's also a question about the greater than Class C waste and about how many curies of that do you expect to be holding on site? Thank you. Corey, I think those are for you.
I think you're right. So I'm gonna have to take a little bit of a look up on that, Ms. Katz. The total curie content of the high level waste or the spent nuclear fuel, I do not have that number in front of me, but it is something I can get. In general, the remainder of the low level waste on site will all be shipped, but I also don't have a total curie count for that. And we may not have an accurate curie count, but just maybe an estimate, which I can bring or provide to Tony so we can post that answer on the NDCAP website. But those are both numbers that I don't have available to me right now. My apologies.
That would help. And in terms of the greater than Class C waste, do you have a sense, since it's basically orphaned waste, do you have a sense of where that waste will go other than sitting on the pad out at Vernon?
I can't answer that question until the Department of Energy and the federal government makes some decisions with respect to how they're going to meet their obligations and address the nuclear waste fund and spent nuclear fuel in general. But I understand your question and concern, and as soon as we have some knowledge and understanding of that, we'll be happy to share that with the panel and the public.
Great. Do you have a curie count on the greater than Class C waste?
I don't have that information right in front of me, Deb. I'm sorry. Again, but that information is well known. We have a extremely precise inventory of all the material that is stored on the ISFSI. So that is information I will be able to provide.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the next hand that I see you raised is Diane, and I apologize if I butcher your last name, D'Aringo.
It's Dorigo, and I wanted to know from anybody who knows if any of the decommissioning waste is going to local landfills.
So there are decommissioning materials from some of the buildings and structures that are going to landfills that are relatively local, primarily in Massachusetts. So a number of the construction debris from the buildings, the cooling towers, the advanced off-gas building, the office buildings, those have gone to local landfills.
And are they slightly radioactive, or is there some estimate of how radioactive they are?
All the materials that have gone to local landfills have no radioactivity associated with them from the plant operations. They're all clean. They've all been free released.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Diane.
I don't see any other hands for public Q&A. If you have anything, please let me know right now.
Yeah. Josh, we do have a question that came in on chat from Ann Darling. The question is, who coordinates with all the public safety personnel on the entire route to Texas? Do they know what is going through their towns?
So there are multiple coordinations that occur. Primarily, there are rules associated with the Department of Transportation and 10 CFR 39 specifically, depending on what the shipment is and how much controls are required. The different states that it travels through, both permissions and tracking for those materials, and in some instances, there will even be escorts for some of those materials. So I don't know if it's fair and to explain that every single state is notified of every single thing that comes through, but for the shipments that required it, there are rules in place and they are carefully managed and followed. And we have had several audits from our Department of Transportation and railroad authorities. And so far, they've been very satisfied with the way we are managing the rail shipments.
Okay, I see a hand raised from Mary Jane Williams. If you would please unmute, and I believe you can ask now.
I have two questions. Number one is, has NorthStar successfully or unsuccessfully decommissioned a plant before?
We have decommissioned a couple of institutional reactors at education or higher learning facilities. This is our first commercial nuclear power generation facility that is a nuclear reactor. We have decommissioned many power generating facilities, many of which are much larger in scope and material overall removal. But this is our first commercial nuclear power plant decommissioning.
And do you have others that you're about to do, that you have, contracts with, that you're going to be doing in the United States?
We do. We have business interests in Florida. We have recently partnered with Duke Power, and we will be decommissioning the Crystal River 3 nuclear power station as well.
Okay, and then another question is, what is your link with the other company? What's it called? Holtec?
We don't have any direct link with Holtec other than the Holtec iStorm 100 system is the storage container system employed at Vermont Yankee. Holtec did perform a good amount of the dry fuel storage campaign and activity to place the fuel in dry storage under Entergy ownership, but NorthStar has no direct link with Holtec other than a business arrangement in support of technical operations with respect to the storage system for the gas that keep the high level waste on the independent spent fuel storage installation.
And how many casks are there? I'm very surprised that you don't know the Curie amount.
There are 57 casks at the Vermont Yankee site, They have 68 fuel assemblies in each one of those. The exact carried content of those is a number that I can find, but it's not one that normally comes up in conversation. My apologies for not having that information handy.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, do we have any other questions from the public?
We did receive a question before from Mr. Paul Blanche, and I know Mr. Blanche is here online, so I would say this is an appropriate time. Mr. Blanche, go ahead. Please unmute your line. Okay, I can see. Okay, Mr. Blanche, it looks like you've muted yourself again.
I got.
We heard you for a moment. Try again, please.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there's a lot of feedback, but we're hearing you.
Okay. I'm not sure where the feedback's coming from. It's not coming from me.
Hey, Paul, I believe you got a couple of devices going because I see you in a couple of different windows. So try to close one and unmute the other, and that should help your feedback.
We can't hear you right now, Mr. Blanche.
Yeah. If it would help, I do have the question here that because Mr. Blanche did email it to me, so what I can do is I can read the question. And the question is, in a recent Freedom of Information Act response from the NRC, the NRC has confirmed that it has not verified that, well, it's basically a specification. Let me read the specification. In NRC regulations 10 CFR 72.236 requires that the spent fuel storage cask and its systems important to safety must be evaluated by appropriate test or by other means acceptable to the NRC to demonstrate that they will reasonably maintain confinement of radioactive material under normal, off-normal, and credible accident conditions. A recent Freedom of Information Act response from the NRC has confirmed that this has not been verified, and there is no analysis supporting this very clear regulation. Without any analysis, Holtec states in its FSAR, this is for the storage system, that loss of confinement is, quote, not credible. Has NDCAP considered this issue or the impact/risk of loss of confinement of the spent fuel?
Yeah, this is Paul. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Yeah. My question, I'm a consultant to some other licensed people dealing with storage. But, you know, obviously our concern is that the integrity of the dry cask that holds these millions and millions of curies of primarily cesium strontium, that their integrity is maintained. And the regulation, as I stated in my question, requires that the license holder or licensee must demonstrate by test or analysis that that integrity has been verified and analyzed. The response to my Freedom of Information Act request essentially said it has not been done. We don't know what will happen when these casks corrode or some other way of losing their integrity. The NRC has told me, and it's in the safety evaluation report, that leakage of these casks is, quote, not credible. There is nothing that is not credible. The reason I'm bringing this question up to this particular group, including the licensee, is I believe that the group, the state, and the licensee has a responsibility to the citizens to assure that the integrity of these casks holding millions and millions of curies is maintained and verified by the NRC and the licensee. The regulations are very clear, and the NRC has not been able to provide me with an answer yet. And I think that the panel should be aware of this major deficiency with the Holtec canisters. Thank you.
So, Paul, can you, I heard you say a lot. What's the question in it?
There really is not a question. I just wanted to make the group aware of this deficiency and that they have some responsibility to assure safety if the NRC will not do it.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Tony, do we have any other questions?
I see a hand raised from Diane DeRigo. I hope I didn't kill your name.
We can't hear you, Diane.
Yes, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Earlier, Mr. Daniels said that the waste that goes to local landfills has been cleared, and I wanted to know what the clearance level is that is used.
Diane, the clearance level we use is non-detectable from background radiation. So we basically determined that there's no activity present from the operations of the nuclear facility itself impacting those materials before we send it on to a local landfill.
So terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tony, do you have any other questions waiting in the queue?
I do not see any. I do not see any hands raised. Let me jump over to chat. Okay, no, I don't see. I don't see any other questions in chat right now that has not been brought up already.
Tony, it's Sarah. I think there's a Mr. Camps who had a question though. He's joining by phone.
Yeah, the question I see for Kevin Camps is when will the public comment period be? I would like to make a 2-minute public comment by phone. He's basically saying he only has an audio connection for this. So we are coming to that.
Yeah, we're getting there. We just need to finish up the questions that we may have from the public.
It looks like Lissa has raised her hand now.
Hi, I just was wondering if Corey could address Paul Blanche's comment regarding the verification and maintenance of the casks. I was under the impression that NorthStar does that regularly, but trying to understand what Mr. Blanche was bringing up regarding a lack of oversight. Could you address that, Corey? Thank you.
Lisa, thanks for the question. Without seeing Mr. Blanche's response from the NRC with respect to his Freedom of Information Act request, I still don't fully understand his comment. What I will tell you is the FSAR for the Holtec storage system is a couple thousand pages long. There are many chapters dedicated to all the analyses associated with the integrity of the components that go into the confinement boundary. There's interim staff guidance and a lot of other rules that play into all the ASME codes and things associated with it. And we do perform regular inspections of the cast and materials and associated with an aging management program to monitor it with industry best practices. So we do in fact monitor that equipment to ensure that it shows no signs of degradation or damage. Hopefully that answers your question.
This is Paul Blanche. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear. I don't know if anyone else can.
We sure can, Paul. Go ahead.
Okay, just a comment. Again, this Freedom of Information Act request is on the web. It's number 2020-000-309. It is the NRC's safety evaluation, and it is Holtec's final safety analysis report. Both of them say leakage from these canisters is not credible, which is in total violation with the regulations. And I think that the licensee needs to look at that FOIA request and look at the NRC's statements within that response.
I'll just say as a panelist that it's something that I will look into and bring up at our next Issues Committee meeting. Thank you, Mr. Blanche.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any other hands raised at this point for questions.
So we will move on to general public comments. It sounds like you had one in the queue, Tony.
Yeah, Skylar Gold had requested to speak during the early comment period. So we will let's start with Skylar, and then I have a list of people who have also requested to speak, but they didn't specifically say early comment period or the comment period at the end of the meeting.
Hi there, Tony. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Hi. My name is Skylar Gould. I'm a citizen and homeowner in Brattleboro, Vermont. I have served as president of New England Coalition on Nuclear Pollution and am currently on the board of Citizens Awareness Network. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm presenting now half of my comments and will present the rest online to Tony. This panel, in response to a proposal by its vice chair, is currently considering whether or not it is appropriate or even legal for the panel, as noted in Tony's notes, quote, to take a position on a national decommissioning issue, unquote. This expressed dilemma is a bit perplexing. What is the panel's previous advisory opinion in support of centralized interim storage, if not a weighing in on a national decommissioning issue? Similarly, it has been proposed that this panel draft letters in support of Yucca Mountain as a national high-level nuclear waste repository. Perhaps this is a good idea on national waste policy, but it is not one to be followed through on until all the issues are thoroughly explored. Another point in this regard, Vermont's granite deposits were originally considered an appropriate site for a national high-level nuclear waste repository. Politics got in the way of that particular possibility at that particular time, but in fact, until a final repository site has been settled on, Vermont will remain a candidate for such a site. Shouldn't this panel be prepared to weigh in on such a prospect? I spoke recently about all of this with Don Hudson, the former and again current chair of the Maine Yankee Community Advisory Panel. You might remember him. He has spoken before this panel previously. He has also advised the NRC at its request on various decommissioning issues, including national waste policy. These are Don's exact words. He encouraged me to share them with you. Quote, about the year 2000, we, the panel, could see the path ahead of us and shifted to national issues, unquote. This was 5 years before completion of the active phase of Maine Yankees decommissioning. And critically, quote, we talk about waste policy all the time, not as individuals, but as the body designated to advise our congressional representatives. That's our job. I'm going to go and just finish this. Thank you. Obviously, this panel is not going to solve technical problems associated with high-level nuclear waste, but it is almost uniquely situated to understand the complex issues surrounding it. Policy decision affecting its final disposition, who will be responsible for it, where it will lie, where will lie the balance between cost and safety, on whose land will it be disposed of, how will it get there, who will profit from this multi-billion-dollar undertaking, who will not. These decisions must be informed by a concerned and educated citizenry. I can see Vermont Yankee from the top of a pine tree in my backyard. The panel needs to understand this is a deeply personal issue, not just to me and others living in the immediate vicinity of the plant, but to a much larger community. Don't be hasty in your decision, but don't delay either. The national discussion on nuclear waste policy is heating up. We have just learned of a new bill presented by Senator Sanders and Representative Welch, the Nuclear Plant Decommissioning Act of 2020, which promises to provide significant funding for citizen advisory boards, such as this one, to explore these very issues. Also, economic development assistance, as well as outright grants to communities hosting so-called stranded waste. But don't wait for its passage. This panel needs to prepare itself now. The new Congress will be considering and almost certainly voting on a revision to the 1982 Waste Policy Act, governing all aspects of national waste policy. Its outcome will affect the health and safety, and yes, the economic health of our entire region for years to come. I'm almost done here. We should all want to know what is happening with this waste and what we can do to bring about its safe disposition. It is only proper that this panel educate itself and then advise the governor and the citizens of Vermont on national waste policy. There is nothing more germane to its duties. Thank you.
Thank you, Skylar. Anybody else have anything as far as general public comments?
We have a comment or a request to comment from Mr. Kevin Camps. So Kevin, please go ahead. Kevin, are you there? You will need to unmute yourself. If you're tied in by phone, press *6.
Yes, can you hear me now? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. My name is Kevin Camps. Thank you for this opportunity. I serve as radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear. And my comment is that my understanding is that your panel signed a letter that was put forward by Yankee Atomic several years ago that expressed support for consolidated interim storage. And as Skylar Gould just mentioned, there seems to be some movement towards putting a similar advocacy statement out in favor of the Yucca Mountain dump in Nevada. And I would urge your panel to retract its past advocacy in favor of consolidated interim storage and certainly not take a position in favor of the Yucca Mountain dump. And I think one common theme between the two would be environmental justice. Both of those proposals are just blatant violations of environmental justice. In the case of Nevada, that is Western Shoshone Indian land, they have suffered under 900 plus nuclear weapons tests and the fallout that came from that. Dramatic health damage to their community and other communities. In the case of New Mexico and Texas, and NorthStar is a part of the Texas proposal to move high-level waste down to the waste control specialist site. They would like to do that. Orano is a major partner in that scheme. These are Hispanic communities, and they've already suffered for many decades, in the case of New Mexico, 75 years from nuclear pollution, beginning with Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project and the Trinity atomic blast on July 16th, 1945. And the history of nuclear pollution just continues from there. So that's really, I mean, that's the beginning of my comment. It's the tip of the iceberg. These are not acceptable proposals, and I urge your panel to retract your past support for consolidated storage and to not support the Yucca Mountain dump. Thank you.
Okay, we have several hands raised. These are all people who had previously requested opportunity to speak. So just starting with who came in first, Mr. Harvey Shackman, go ahead. Please unmute yourself.
All right, am I clear? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Hi. I work with the Citizens Awareness Network. I just wanted to say I am strongly against dumping our toxic radioactive waste at any interim storage site. Each time it's moved, the chance of accident and leakage increases. Move it once safely and then never move it again. That should be the project. The people living around West Texas, they don't want it. They speak from experience. They suffered radiation exposure during the mining of the uranium, and they still suffer. Their land and water suffer from over 1,000 abandoned uranium mines along with extensive mounds of tailings, which continue to pollute, as well as fallout from all the aerial testing of atomic weapons that took place that they were exposed to. I want to quote Winona LaDuke. She wrote a book just published recently called Uranium Atlas 2020. And in the preface, she states, more than 3,000 Dene, who are also called Navajo, worked in the uranium mines in the 1950s without special work clothes or any kind of radiation protection. Covered in radioactive dust, they walked home to their families, and without knowing it, they contaminated their loved ones. People are still dying in Deneta, the land of the Navajo. The danger is not over nor contained, since almost 1,000 abandoned mines still contaminate that region. At least 70% of the uranium in circulation worldwide is mined on the land of indigenous communities and tribal people. On October 5th, 2019, a U.S. health official, Dr. Loretta Christensen, Chief Medical Officer on the Navajo Nation for Indian Health Service, said, this is a quote, about a quarter of 781 Navajo women and some infants who were part of a federally funded study on uranium exposure had high levels of the radioactive metal in their system decades after mining for uranium on their reservation. Among them, 26% has concentrations of uranium that exceeded levels found in the highest 5% of U.S. population. And newborns with equally high concentrations continued to be exposed to uranium during their first year. So they suffered from the mining, and now we want them to suffer again so we can clean up the mess we made up here. I wouldn't do it to my family, so how can I do it to someone else's family? This kind of treatment is nothing other than institutional racism, and I will do all that I can to stop it, and not in my name. Thank you very much.
Okay, the next hand we have raised is Deborah Stolaroff.
You hear me?
Yes.
Are you able? Okay, great. I am a member of the Vermont Decommissioning Alliance, and I live in Plainfield, Vermont. So there's never been an answer to the question of what to do with Vermont Yankees' dangerously toxic high-level nuclear waste. With more and more aging nuclear power plants being shuttered and decommissioned, the answer to that question should be of paramount concern for all. In particular, I'm concerned about transportation of the high-level nuclear waste, the storage of that waste, and the environmental injustice experienced by the communities in which the waste is going to be dumped. Transportation of Vermont's high-level nuclear waste over roads and rails leaves potential for accidents. When nuclear waste is concerned, any potential for an accident is too much risk. A minor accident can be catastrophic for millions. As Vermonters witnessed in late June, accidents do happen. We were lucky that the trailer hauling the cask on Route 11 in Andover, Chester, was empty. If the cask had contained nuclear waste, 60 square miles of Vermont could have been uninhabitable for decades. The fact that there's not yet a scientifically approved repository site, nor a guaranteed way in which high-level nuclear waste can be safely stored without nuclear leaks is of high concern. Similar to transportation accidents, any potential leak is too high of a risk. Finally, the residents of New Mexico and West Texas, where Vermont's high-level nuclear waste is slated to be dumped, have little political power to object to the NRC's decisions. Ironically, there isn't a nuclear power plant in New Mexico to generate nuclear waste. Dumping our waste in that region is an unconscionable injustice for communities of that region. None of us want nuclear waste in our backyards. However, it was Vermont's choice to create nuclear waste without knowing what would happen to it upon decommissioning. Therefore, we need to be responsible for Vermont Yankees waste. We should not send it to other states to deal with it. We must keep Vermont Yankees high-level nuclear waste stored, or any waste, stored within our state's borders, preferably at the Vermont Yankee site in steel and concrete casks surrounded by berms, where it can be observed and maintained until a permanent location is scientifically proven to be safe. This would prevent possible accidents during transportation and not require that high-level nuclear waste be moved a second time once a permanent site is located. Thanks. That's all I have to say.
Okay, the next person we have in line is Leona Morgan. Please unmute yourself and go ahead. We do have one person on the phone after that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, thank you for taking my comments. I am a board member of the Citizens Awareness Network, and I'm also a resident of New Mexico. I can put some of the comments in context for us out here. I am Diné. I'm indigenous to this area. My family's been in the northwestern part of the state for thousands of years. And I can definitely say our communities are not happy about these proposals to store spent fuel either in New Mexico or Texas. And so I just had a question. Knowing both of the proposals are still going through NEPA and also legal challenges, what's the alternative if the permit applications, if NRC rejects these applications for consolidated interim storage? What's Vermont Yankees plan B for your high-level waste if the applications don't go through or are delayed because of these challenges from our communities? Just that's my only question. And we oppose the dumps down here. I just want to make it clear. There's a little bit of misinformation from the some of the company people are saying that we want it. I just want to tell you all directly, we don't want the waste, and it's not just to keep it out of New Mexico, but we're very concerned about the transport across the country. But I'm curious if the applications are rejected, what are you all planning to do with the waste, the high-level waste? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that comment. If I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that, otherwise we can proceed with the next person. The next commenter is actually someone on the phone, Audrey Famet. Audrey, please unmute yourself and you go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I'm Audrey Fumet from Montpelier, Vermont. I'd like to say spent nuclear fuel remains lethal for 240,000 years, according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The nuclear industry is preparing to send this waste to working class communities of color in Texas and New Mexico. These communities did not benefit from the energy the nuclear power plants generated and lost nothing to do with their toxic waste. To transport shipments of high-level nuclear waste through 44 states to hold at so-called centralized interim storage sites in these communities is potentially dangerous as well as unfair to the people living nearby. Equally dangerous is the shipment of this toxic waste should an accident occur. I propose until the federal government establishes a permanent storage site for this waste, it must remain in hardened on-site storage at the Vermont Yankee. Thank you.
Okay, based on hands raised, we have Deb Katz. Deb, you have spoken a couple of times, so I'm going to ask that you try to keep your comment short just so we can get to other people.
Absolutely. I will be brief. So let me just say, I live between two high-level nuclear waste dumps. I live 4 miles from Yankee Row and 16 miles from Vermont Yankee. And what I want to urge the NDCAP to actually do is to attempt to have discussions on the high-level waste, the issues of the alternatives to deal with it, and to open it up to have a discussion, because I think these issues are vitally important to both Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And this waste, for all the idea of where it will go, isn't going anywhere for a while. And people are vitally concerned about this. So I urge the NDCAP to actually start having some meetings to open up information about waste and the different alternatives to deal with it. Thank you.
Okay. We also have Diane Darago has her hands raised.
Yes, I also wanted to make a comment on the high-level waste. And the Yucca Mountain site is on Western Shoshone land. It is riddled with volcanoes, potentially active, earthquake faults, potentially active, and the analyses have indicated that it cannot meet the groundwater standards set for high-level repository. The rules had to be changed at least 4 times that I know of during the licensing process before it was canceled under the Obama administration. So, and it is not legal for us to be doing anything but passing through Western Shoshone land under the Ruby Valley Treaty of 1863. So there's a lot of pretty clear reason to not proceed with Yucca Mountain. The state of Nevada has between 200 and 300 active objections or contentions to the licensing if that licensing process were to start up again. So it's not an easy fix for what to do with the waste. The 2 supposedly interim sites that are targeted now, it's illegal to proceed with those because you can't have, under federal law, interim sites for high-level waste unless there's an operating permanent site. And the money that the companies that are wanting to get at the 2 sites in Texas and New Mexico, it comes from the funds that are supposed to be for permanent disposal for reactor decommissioning. There's not money for interim storage, yet they're hoping that they can change the laws to enable some funding. In fact, the decommissioning plan for at least one, if not both of those sites at one point was that the Department of Energy would own the waste and the Department of Energy would take care of the decommissioning. So the decommissioning is of those sites is not legal the way that they're proposing it. And so I encourage the committee to reassess the previous advocacy for whatever high-level facilities were made, and to look at what the current situation is and take a position with regard to that, as we expect. I don't know if it would be during lame duck session, but possibly next year, that there would be federal legislation on this. And we are certainly advocating for better, safer, more secure storage at the site. And then with regard to the low-level waste, I just want to let you know that Vermont passed a law in 1980. It's one sentence. No radioactive waste or radioactive materials generated by any government agency or pursuant to a government contract or license shall be treated, recycled, stored, or disposed of except at a licensed radioactive facility, whether or not that waste or those materials have been deregulated or declared exempt from regulatory control. So by any federal or state agencies. So I'm glad to hear that no radioactive waste from decommissioning is going into regular garbage. I'm hoping that the clearance levels actually are preventing that, and I'm glad to hear that. But it's a concern that I would encourage folks to pay attention to. Thanks.
Okay, Josh, just heads up. Now there are a total of 10 other people that had requested opportunity to speak this evening from the public, but they did not say specifically when. So I think what I'll do is I'll read out the names of folks who have not commented yet and see if any of them wish to comment at this point. Jeanette
Hey,
Bear.
Tony, before you do that, I see that Representative Coffey's hand is up.
Yes.
To make a comment. So I'm assuming it's regarding something that has been recently spoken about. So if we can get to her before we move on, that'd be great.
Okay, that being the case, Sarah, go ahead.
Sure, I don't want to take up anyone else's time because I think it's important that we hear from folks, but I just wanted to acknowledge to some of the folks who've joined us tonight, because I think you're not, there are only a few of you who've been regulars in my time serving on NDCAP. So I just wanted to let you know that I think this panel is concerned about the waste question. And I know that I serve on the issues committee, and it's one of the things that we're looking to have a presentation, get more information about, and also to hear from our federal delegation. With the article that came up in the recent newspaper, I think people's concerns are rightfully focused on this. And so I just wanted to let you know I'm listening, and I do think that at some point tonight, perhaps the commissioner or I think there's one or two members of the current panel who were who served on the panel previously, but there's a little bit of confusion about the letter and what the letter was, and I think in the role of NDCAP as an advisory panel. Every year we write a report to the governor and we play an advisory role. So I just wanted to clarify some of that. So and I know that we're going to be talking about spent fuel storage in an upcoming meeting more specifically. So I appreciate the comments tonight.
Okay. Josh, do you just want me to go through the names now, or should we just assume that these folks will speak at the end of the meeting?
So I guess I would move on with the agenda items, Tony, because I don't know what these additional folks are wanting to speak about. We do have a Q&A possibility at 8:30 after regarding the spent fuel policy presentations. I guess I would ask at this time if you have any public Q&A regarding anything other than the spent fuel policy, please raise your hand now. Otherwise, we will continue on with Jim Hamilton and then offer you the ability to speak at the appropriate times in the agenda.
A reminder to folks who are tied in via phone, please press *6 to unmute yourselves before speaking.
Does Maddie have a slot? She does want to talk.
Okay, I do not see any hands raised at this point, Josh.
So let's move on with Mr. Hamilton's presentation.
Okay, and in that regard, Jim, Jim, you are tied into the meeting, and it looks like you have unmuted yourself. I will have your presentation up in just a moment. It should be there now.
Thanks. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can, Jim.
Great. So I was asked to sort of give a couple of thoughts on spent fuel policy, so I'm going to do that. Thanks for the chance to be here. I don't have a lot of slides. I'm just going to try and generate some thoughts and maybe have some Q&A. And if you have any questions, jump in. It's not a lecture. Next slide. I just want to set some context a little bit. I played in the sandbox for a while, did some work for DOE on their consent-based siting work a while back, and then most recently did some work for Commerce on nuclear closure communities. I've also worked for Entergy and NorthStar at VY. I currently run a nonprofit that focuses on socioeconomic impacts of closure. And I work for a company called Deep Isolation that disposes of nuclear waste in sort of geologic settings. But today I'm just here as an unaffiliated private citizen. I don't have an axe to grind. I'm not trying to sell anything. I just want to give you my sort of 2 cents on what's going on a national perspective around spent fuel. So thanks for listening to that. I'm just going to talk on the next slide and sort of walk you through the universe of options for spent fuel at Vermont Yankee. This is it. All right, there are 5. And I've been listening to this for the last hour or so, and I've read previous comments and minutes and things, and so you're familiar with most of this, but I'm just going to give you my 2 cents. We've all heard about Yucca Mountain. We've all heard about $15 billion. Like it or not, it technically is the law of the land. The law says the waste shall go there. Until the law is changed, that's where the waste is supposed to go. Now, it's essentially unworkable. People have admitted that. It's not dead, but it's almost dead. But if you're trying to figure out, where's waste going to go, you have to ask yourself, well, what would happen if magically everybody thought Yucca Mountain was the greatest thing? You're at least 10 to 15 years away from any waste moving. That's just, sort of math, trying to get the licensing process started again, trying to find people who wrote the original documents to come back and figure what they say. It'll take at least 10 to 15 years before any waste ends up there. So that's a bookend. That's just, a Yucca Mountain bookend. We've heard a lot about interim storage. The folks in New Mexico and Texas are trying to advance those. They're pursuing licenses. New Mexico's out front. It's anybody's guess when a license could be granted. I think that probably in the New Mexico case, 22, 23, give or take. But it's obviously subject to litigation. And just because you get an NRC license doesn't mean you get to operate it. Those are very different things. The NRC license is a license that says we think it's safe enough. Building it, operating it's a very different ballgame. The states obviously have a large role in that. I think it's safe to say that neither state is super excited about interim storage. That's just my read. But I think that the earliest you could see waste at an interim storage facility would probably be, I'm talking early. I think 5 years. So 5 to 10, you'll see waste moving to interim storage. Once it's there, storage is not disposal. So it still has to go to Yucca Mountain or option C. Option C would be if people realize that Yucca is not going to happen. It still needs to go somewhere. And so if they started the process all over again, then you're at least 20 years away from seeing any fuel move. So if Yucca starts up, it's 10 to 15. If you start all over again, it's at least 20. And option C would require changes to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which would require the federal government to write policy and pass it. Something that hasn't happened a lot in the nuclear waste space of late. And also, we've heard a little bit about issues about transportation. Option A, B, and C will require the waste to be moved. Historically, DOE has been engaged with states and tribes around transportation issues under what's called the 180C process. And Tony knows all about that. He's played in that sandbox. That process has sort of waned over the last few years. So this transportation needs to sort of get up and running again, and that's another wrinkle to this that needs to be considered. Option D is on-site geologic disposal. Now you could technically drill a hole 16 inches diameter, 3,000 feet down, 2,000 feet horizontally, and put the waste there. Technically, it's pretty straightforward. It would also require changes to the Policy Act. And you could probably do that, maybe 5 to 8 years from now. And then option E is it sits where it is. And you monitor it and you watch it until A, B, C, or D happens. But that's pretty much the universe of options here for waste at Vermont and every other nuclear power plant in the country. So you ask yourself, well, I ask myself a lot, I say, why is it this way? Why are we completely hamstrung? And, the answer is all about power as far as I'm concerned. Basically, the equation there is the political cost of doing something is greater than the political cost of doing nothing. That's just math, it's just politics. And why is that? Well, because quite honestly, the costs of spent fuel remaining at nuclear power plants has been borne by a small number of plants that essentially have been easy to ignore. It's been about 20 years, nothing's changed. Lately, you're seeing, however, bigger, more high-profile plants coming offline. Indian Point, Diablo, San Onofre, Oyster Creek, and also potentially 4 in Illinois and Chicago. And the multi-billion-dollar question is, will this make a difference? Will this move the needle? And the answer is, I don't know. The answer is nobody knows. But it sort of gets back to the beginning part where the cost of doing something is greater than the cost of doing nothing. And until that calculus changes, I feel that the fuel is going to stay where it is and not a lot's going to happen in this space. Now, people are passing legislation and they've been doing so for several years. But I think it all boils down to that, equation at the top of the page. So I don't have anything else of any excitement to tell you. basically it's status quo. There's not a lot of progress going on. There are some simmering issues here and there, but I've tried to condense, 50 years of inaction into 4 slides, but that's just the cold hard reality. It's not moving anytime soon. There are a lot of moving parts to make any progress here. There are some options, but it's wait and see right now. So I think I had 10 minutes. I used up 6. So anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer
them. Actually, Mr. Chair, with the way the agenda is set up, what we have next is a discussion from Haley Perrow of Senator Sanders' staff before questions.
Hi, Tony. Should I go ahead?
I guess so. No one is objecting.
Yeah, go ahead, Haley.
Okay.
Could we just take down Jim's presentation while Haley's speaking? So we
Certainly.
we can see Haley better.
Yeah, hold on.
And no presentation for me, but I'm happy to follow up with any written materials that folks would like. For those of you who haven't met, my name is Haley Perrow, and I do outreach on energy and environmental issues for Senator Sanders. I'm based in Vermont, and also on the line are my colleagues from Senator Leahy's office. Tom Barry's on the phone, and Thea Wurtzberg from Congressman Welch's office is on the line as well. So I was asked to give a brief update on congressional action on waste storage. And first, I did want to highlight a bill that Senator Sanders introduced just last week in the Senate. Congressman Welch introduced the same bill in the House, and Senator Leahy has co-sponsored the Senate version of the bill. He's an original co-sponsor. And this bill may be one that you're familiar with. I think someone earlier on mentioned it. This is the Nuclear Plant Decommissioning Act. This has been introduced in a number of Congresses. But this time we took some of the feedback we had heard both in Vermont and nationally with some of our co-sponsors, and we added a few provisions. So just as a refresher, this bill gives states a meaningful role in the development and the approval of a reactor shutdown plan and the post-shutdown license transfers. The important additions are a set of grants based on some feedback from the NRC hearings that came to Vermont and other community boards last year, like NDCAP. I know we had a hearing probably almost exactly a year ago. This bill would provide funding so that you could better run, I shouldn't say better run, it's very well run, but you could use that funding to support NDCAP. So that would be funding that all community boards across the nation that have an actively decommissioning plan would get. The other grant that would be involved would be an economic development grant, similar to some that the Economic Development Administration already has, and this would be for regional economic development. Lastly, and importantly, and relevant to storage, is that the bill would include funding that's similar to what's proposed in Senator Duckworth's Stranded Act, and that funding is compensation for such as Vernon. So Vernon would get compensated for storing nuclear waste on site. As folks have mentioned, we're seeing that in a lot of communities without a larger federal or permanent solution to storage. So that bill, like I mentioned, was introduced last week, and we're happy to keep you updated on that. Let me see here. So as far as legislation, the 116th Congress, we've seen a number of bills introduced. However, I did want to mention that when this session of Congress ends at the end of this year, bills that did not make it across the finish line will need to be reintroduced. So in some ways, the slate is wiped clean. However, we do see the same bills often introduced from Congress to Congress. Additionally, just to keep in mind, obviously the outcome of the election could have a significant impact on nuclear policy, or some impact at least, particularly if we have a new administration. That might mean a new Secretary of Energy, and also if we see the Senate change to Democratic control. So a lot of unknowns right now, but just to highlight a few bills. The following bills Senator Sanders is a co-sponsor of. So one deals with informed consent. This is from the senator from Nevada. And basically it sort of says that DOE cannot spend money and enter into an agreement with the state for a repository without having consent from the local governments and Indian tribes. Also in Congress, we have the Stranded Act, which I mentioned earlier. The major part of that is the compensation for local communities. Well, I should say there's a new version of another bill we've seen several times from Senator Markey, also with Senator Gillibrand and Senator Sanders, and that's the Dry Cask Storage Act. That one is of 2019. And that would require that every nuclear reactor operator complies with an NRC plan that would require spent fuel to be placed in dry cask storage within 7 years of the time the plan is submitted to the NRC. And that also would expand the emergency planning zone for non-compliant reactor operators to 50 miles. I did want to highlight a few other bills that Senator Sanders is not currently on, but maybe of interest in terms of storage. One is the Nuclear Waste Administration Act, and that is from Senator Murkowski in Alaska. That would create a new nuclear waste administration, which was something that was suggested as part of the Blue Ribbon Commission. And it would also move toward a permanent repository. So there are some provisions there that says you can work on interim storage, but you can only work on interim storage if you are also expending funding and actively working on a permanent repository. And it sets the date for a permanent repository to be established by 2052. There's also the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendments Act of 2019, which has gotten quite a bit of attention. That would authorize DOE to store spent fuel at interim storage facilities owned by non-federal entities if consent was provided. And there's provisions there that explicitly authorize DOE to enter into contracts. And this bill was introduced in the House the last time I gave an update. Since my last update, which was again probably about this time last year, there is a Senate version. It's still, in committee. It has one co-sponsor and has not moved anywhere since November 2019. Lastly, as far as bills, there's also the Jobs Not Waste Act, also from a Nevada senator, Senator Rosen. And that prohibits DOE from taking action toward developing the Yucca Mountain repository until the Office of Management and Budget issues a report on job-created alternative uses of the site, and Congress holds a hearing on alternative uses. So not surprisingly from the Nevada delegation, we see significant concerns with the Yucca Mountain. And then really briefly, I just wanted to touch on appropriations. Initially, we had seen President Trump put in his budget proposals funding for Yucca Mountain. We would not see those funding requests end up in congressional appropriations. However, I believe in the last budget proposal from the president, there was no request for funding for Yucca Mountain. There have been attempts to include funding for interim storage, but for the last bill for FY20, as far as I could see, there was no specific spending or funding allocated and appropriated for consolidated storage. Certainly something, again, that we see come up, but not something that has become law. I think I'll leave it at that if that works. And when the appropriate time is, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, the next agenda item is panel questions and answers on these last two presentations.
Yeah, we're going to move right into the panel's questions regarding the two presentations that we just had between Jim Hamilton and Haley Perro's presentation. If from the panel has any questions, we'll start with Maddie Arms. I see her hand up.
Thank you, Josh. I am the representative from the town of Vernon, and I have some concerns and have had some concerns with regard to our position. And while not all of this is specific to or germane to the topics you've been talking about. Some of it is. I would like to speak about Vernon's position on the NDCAP mission statement, the decommissioning of the Vermont Yankee site, and the town's projections for eventual redevelopment of the site. First, the mission statement of NDCAP, as I read it, speaks to the education and dissemination of information to the public regarding the Vermont Yankee decommissioning. This includes providing answers to public-generated questions and a forum for the discussion of such. Second, the town of Vernon supports this mission statement. It would not support any change to this statement that would amend it to include site redevelopment. Redevelopment is the sole purview of the town of Vernon and the state of Vermont, being the primary stakeholder. Additionally, as NorthStar is the owner of the site until decommissioning is complete, they too have important stakeholder status. The town of Vernon is and has always been aware of the inherent responsibility created and mandated by the on-site IFAC pad location. That is the spent fuel casks created by the former Vermont Yankee. We do not trivialize the risks and are not uninformed, cavalier, or naive about its design or the extensive planning that is and will be required to site another commercial industrial business in this location. We are in fact totally aware of being the repository for the spent fuel ad infinitum, or at least until the federal government steps up to the plate and fulfills its obligation to provide a safe repository. In this vein, we respectfully request other NDCAP members to acknowledge our primary stakeholder status and in the future refrain from statements and/or comments that degrade or insult our municipal intelligence efforts and abilities to chart the future of the town of Vernon. The information regarding permanent spent fuel nuclear storage abounds. There is ample publicly available detail about multiple options and the role that the federal government should play. I have a list of readily available and accessible internet sites that provide in-depth information on the subject and would be happy to share on request. We can and should be informed and knowledgeable in this regard. Our purpose here is to discuss and monitor the safe decommissioning of Vermont Yankee. Spent nuclear fuel permanent storage is the task of the federal government. A forum for solving permanent spent nuclear fuel can and should be addressed in a separate venue, lest we deviate from our primary purpose here at NDCAP. In August, the Vernon Planning and Economic Development Commission applied for and expects to receive a funding grant from the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Together with a one-to-one match from the town of Vernon, these funds amount to approximately $90,000. This is expected to produce a planning process that will provide the roadmap for a detailed master plan of the VY site. The Select Board and the Planning Commission have met with and will continue to meet with potential developers. To date, local as well as national entities have expressed a strong interest in redeveloping the Vermont Yankee site. The Planning Commission has established a confidential vetting process for reviewing proposals and anticipates that a request for proposal will be forthcoming to publicly solicit such development proposals. Vernon is also an active observer of NorthStar's decommissioning progress. The Select Board, Planning and Economic Development Board members, and local contractors have maintained multiple vantage points for these activities. NorthStar has been appropriately helpful and welcoming to members who wish to see for themselves the ongoing progress that is being made and have delivered answers and information freely and promptly. Until decommissioning is complete, NorthStar is regarded by the town as an important stakeholder and valued partner. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. It looks like the next hand that we have up is Melissa Wyman.
Thank you, Josh. I have a brief comment and then a couple questions for Jim Hamilton and also Haley. And thank you both for being here tonight. My intention in terms of focusing on this issue is not to divert NDCAP from its task, rather to square us solely on the task at hand. That is why I've been concerned that the NDCAP has taken a position on consolidated interim storage unwittingly. I think it behooves us as a panel to be aware of what that position means in the national context. We are on record as a panel without a vote and without any awareness really of what it meant as taking a position on supporting the concept of consolidated interim storage. I think if we want to maintain that position, we should have a discussion about it and understand what it means. So there's that point. And I do believe that if we want to stay free of any discussion of spent fuel, nuclear waste, and these issues, then we should retract that statement because it's out there and we did it and there was no vote. So that's just something I want to say. And regarding Jim Hamilton, I'd love for you, Jim, to talk about the Economic Development Agency and the Department of Commerce Nuclear Communities Fund. I believe that your organization has received quite a large grant from them. These are the kinds of funds that could come to communities like ours if we are hosting the waste. So if you would, I would love you to explain a little bit about your mandate and what you do with those funds. I saw in the guidelines for receiving those funds, and I think it was about $10 million that you see. I don't know how much you received. I'm wondering how much you received, but one of the guidelines is for your work, if you receive those funds, is to establish formal national networks of nuclear communities for information distribution, training, and sharing of experiences relevant to closures. I think one of the big reasons that there's been no national movement in the Congress is because there really is no concerted effort for nuclear host communities to come together and to demand action. So I would be curious to see what you say about that. And then for Haley, I'm just wondering if you could characterize the Trump administration's attitude, or maybe lack of attitude, I don't know, toward this issue of nuclear waste storage. I think it really, as long as we keep producing nuclear waste, we really need to develop a way to deal with it. And so those who are in favor of more nuclear waste and nuclear energy production, it would seem to me that if we're going to make more waste, we better find a place to put it. So thank you both for answering those questions.
This is Jim. I can go first. I just want to clarify something. So in the last federal budget, there was $15 million allocated to nuclear closure communities, and that was due to the work of various representatives, both Congress people and senators. We didn't get any of that. We just helped sort of push that ball along. That was the work of others. And it has nothing to do with hosting spent fuel. It's simply helping communities plan for economic recovery following closure of nuclear power plants. And I think the town of Vernon has already applied for something like that. So that process is sort of underway. What happens in the next federal budget cycle is anybody's guess. But I think there's growing interest in seeing those funds get passed to communities. But that's That's where it is right now.
And Lisa, to your question, I certainly don't want to speak for the Trump administration, but just in terms of what kind of funding requests we've seen. So there had been a number of requests for Yucca Mountain funding from President Trump. However, in fiscal year 2021, the administration requested no funding for Yucca, and instead it proposed, I think it's 27.5 million for interim storage planning. So a shift towards interim storage planning, it seems. But I, certainly take your point, and know Senator Sanders does as well, that we should not be producing more waste when we don't have a good solution for it.
And just as a follow-up, Haley, isn't it true that there's a number?
You can listen to that.
I'm sorry, just as a follow-up to Haley, are you aware that there's a number of states that have prohibited the building of new nuclear reactors, like California, in the state until there is a national nuclear waste policy? I believe last time I looked, there was something like 13 states that had taken that position.
I wasn't aware of that. I mean, I think, like I sort of alluded to, that's certainly in line with Bernie's thinking that, obviously there's a number of safety concerns, but particularly no waste solution, and that we certainly should not be building more plants. If we can stop that, I think that's something we would certainly support.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is Josh. I got a question for Jim Hamilton while we're on this vein. You've received some funding from the federal government for your organization. What communities have you reached out to, and what has been the result of your reaching out to those communities and helping them through this decommissioning process?
So we've worked with Zion a little bit in Illinois. We've worked with Palisades in Michigan. We've worked with Diablo in California, all of whom have submitted grant applications to go after some of that money from the Department of Commerce. I've had some conversations with the folks in Vernon, Plymouth, a little bit of Oyster Creek, a little bit of New York, a couple others here and there, Pennsylvania. We're just trying to raise awareness and help people access federal funding and prepare applications for the Department of Commerce, Economic Development Authority that sort of meets their guidelines.
Can people mute themselves, because we hear a lot of background noise? Thank you.
Yeah, folks, please remember to self-mute. From what I can see, there's only one or two people unmuted right now, so I'm not sure if this is just feedback or what.
So, Tony, it looks like we have Chris Campney with his hand up for a panel member.
Hey, clicking the wrong buttons. Yeah, so folk know, and maybe somebody from Vernon can speak to it. Yeah, Vernon did put in for U.S. Economic Development Administration nuclear community, put in a grant proposal. And I think it was for the maximum, or maybe no. I'm trying to find Martin Langeveld's proposal. But anyway, they did put in an application. I'm not sure what the timeline on it is as far as hearing back about whether or not they'll get it. I would imagine that they have a very strong chance of getting it. And the town of Vernon put in a strong monetary match of their own to it. So that's good news. They were the only community in Vermont to put in for that funding.
I don't see any other panel members' hands raised at this point. We will move on to public participation.
Okay. Of the folks who requested to speak prior to the meeting, do any have comments or questions on the two presentations? I see a hand raise from Mr. Timothy Judson. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Timothy Judson, and I'm the executive director of the Nuclear Information and Resource Service, which is an environmental organization that was founded in 1978 to be a resource center for grassroots organizations and communities that are concerned about nuclear power and radioactive waste. I'm also the chair of the board of Citizens Awareness Network and have been a member of CAN since for 22 years. And in that capacity, engaged in issues with respect to Vermont Yankee for all that time. I think we've already heard a lot about the issues of environmental justice with consolidated interim storage, and in particular with NorthStar and its affiliate WCS's proposal to create a CIS facility in West Texas. This is a majority Hispanic community that's already burdened with a lot of other environmental impacts, from oil and gas drilling to a uranium enrichment facility with many, many tons of depleted uranium stored there, nearby nuclear waste repository that stores Department of Energy waste, as well as other polluting industries and hazardous waste facilities. But from the NorthStar representative earlier in the presentation, Vermont has already sent 190 shipments of radioactive waste to that community. And the additional burden of putting a CIS facility there is really, it's emblematic of environmental injustice. What we see throughout the country with these type of issues is that environmental injustice exists precisely to make bad things happen. We have issues of environmental injustice because industry wants to conduct certain activities to dump materials in certain places because communities that are whiter and more affluent would not accept it. And this is exactly the case with what's proposed for CIS. CIS is currently not legal in the U.S. for a very good reason. The Congress, in fact, considered implementing a CIS policy back in the 1990s, but President Clinton vetoed it, and the Congress couldn't override the veto. CIS would effectively set up de facto. CIS, if implemented before a nuclear waste repository is functioning, would essentially create a de facto nuclear waste dump that's essentially above ground. And this is exactly one of the worst things that could possibly happen to high level waste. As the Supreme Court, or as the courts validated in one of the lawsuits over the environmental standards for Yucca Mountain, this waste is going to be hazardous for 1 million years. So, what we see happening, and I think this is evident from Mr. Hamilton's presentation, is that we've been suffering the impacts of this sort of transactional, cynical approach to nuclear waste policy for decades. Congress picked Yucca Mountain in the late 90s because at the time it seemed like the most politically convenient solution for nuclear waste. And as we've seen, just because it's politically convenient at the time doesn't mean that it's going to be politically realistic down the road. And the same is true of the CIS proposals for WCS and for Holtec. The opposition is building already in New Mexico and in Texas, just because the NRC may end up issuing a license for one or both of those facilities doesn't mean that they're actually ever going to happen. And meanwhile, states like Vermont are going to be stuck with storing waste in dry casks in interim facilities for decades. So what's really needed is a wholesale revisiting of nuclear waste policy in this country. First of all, reactor communities where this waste is going to be stored for decades need to be far better protected than they currently are. There's been a number of proposals, including hardened on-site storage, to ensure the secure storage of waste for whatever period of time. Waste continues to be stored at reactor sites until there's a longer-term solution. storage method. But the idea that but what's being sold to states right now through these CIS proposals is really a fantasy, and it's one that's predicated in environmental racism. And for that reason, this is something that Vermont and the NDCAP should not be supporting. We need viable, socially just and scientifically credible solutions to nuclear waste. And CIS, is really just a false solution that we need to reject. Thanks very much.
Okay, I do not see any other hands raised right now. Of the folks who had requested opportunity to speak, who have not spoken as yet, Jeanette Baer or Brian Campbell, do you have comments at this time? Okay, how about Alice Evans? Paul Gunter?
No. This is Alice.
Yes. Go ahead, Alice.
Thank you. I'm just going to read a statement I prepared earlier. Good evening. My name is Alice Evans. I live in Waitsfield. My message to the panel is to be entirely transparent with Vermont citizens on the nature of the threats posed by nuclear waste left from the closed plant. The relatively small attendance tonight, because I project that if people knew about the threats and concerns, they were highly publicized in multiple forums, that there'd be much larger attendance both here and at the in-person meetings. But the relatively small attendance tonight, as well as those meetings I have attended in recent years, suggests that, that the panel does not consider it any part of its work to fully inform Vermonters what they face if a scientifically sound and permanent solution to nuclear waste storage is not found, determined on. And yes, permanent does mean many, many, many thousands of years. I acknowledge that it's not your responsibility to create that solution, but until a permanent solution is created, and until Vermont's current and future waste products are moved to such a permanent site, I'd argue that you can and should be educating the Vermont public about the dangers of our nuclear waste in general, and ours that we're responsible for. Accidents of various kinds, leakages, natural disasters, unstable geology, acts of terrorism, any and all of those present potential for catastrophe, whether that occurs at the site, on the way to an interim, so-called interim, or after, or at any of the places, pardon me, now under consideration for the so-called storage. My question for the panel then is a challenge too. What is your communication plan for bringing this information to the attention of Vermonters soon and repeatedly over generations to come? The various issues that speakers have raised tonight are of public concern. There is a demand for public policy that will address the scientific, environmental, and human justice aspects of Vermont's and the nation's current nuclear waste dilemma. Thank you.
Okay, just going back, Jeanette Baer or Brian Campbell, do you have comments at this time? Okay, moving on. Paul Gunter, I see that you are on the line. Do you have a comment at this time?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. My name is Paul Gunter, nuclear in Maryland. And, I also sit on a national decommissioning working group. Right now, we're in the final stages of planning a Capitol Hill briefing on decommissioning and a lot of the national policy conundrums that you've been talking about on this as face you at the state are certainly true nationally. And so on November 13th is the tentative date right now. We will be holding a webinar focused on Congress and the legislative aides there, focused on the energy issue. Again, many of the national impacts that decommissioning raises, as you have outlined here, particularly with transportation of high-level nuclear waste, centralized interim storage, and whatever kind of final solution we come up with for long-term management. But one that I wanted to speak to you tonight, and particularly with the aim of seeing if we could raise it in the Issues Committee for a more in-depth discussion, has to do with, for the last 20 years now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the national laboratories have viewed decommissioning as a critical process for license renewals, so that there's a direct connection between decommissioning, looking at a host of aging mechanisms that have been eating away, embrittling, cracking through safety margins during the operational period, that now come to the fore in terms of critical knowledge gaps and technical gaps and general knowledge gaps that are being assumed for licenses to continue operation of nuclear reactors, which are now going out into their second license renewal for 60 to 80 years. And in December of 2017, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, on contract with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, published a technical letter report that essentially sought to develop criteria and requirements for strategically harvesting aged samples from materials in these decommissioning nuclear power stations, particularly base metals from the reactor vessel, materials, over 600 miles of electrical cable, jacketing, and insulation that is not accessible for inspections and maintenance throughout the operations of in many of the areas of these nuclear stations, as well as concrete, and it's not accessible. And but going through these aging processes that are eating away safety margins, and in the process, this Pacific Northwest National Laboratory report offered recommendations that would seek to strategically harvest from these aged systems, structures, and components these materials for laboratory analysis that would then be incorporated into the license renewal review process, particularly for these 60 to 80-year license extensions right now that are raising these questions with regard to the reliability of operations and safety performance. So Vermont Yankee really has on its hands something more than just decommissioning, decontamination, and dismantlement in terms of national policy. but it reflects on the safety of nuclear power into the future as these license extensions are now moving forward. We have, in fact, fleet-wide license extensions from Duke Power, who want to put 11 nuclear power stations up for renewal for their 60 to 80 year license operation. And but what happened was that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, after this report was published on the PPNL website, and also on the International Atomic Energy Agency's website, as well as the Department of Energy's public website, after it was posted for 9 months, the NRC management had the report removed. We downloaded the report. We provided it to Tony as a part to go before your summaries committee. But the NRC sought to and succeeded at putting together a revised report to this PNNL study that scrubbed some 63 references to these technical gaps, knowledge gaps, and critical gaps.
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
This is Josh, the chair of the NDCAP here. We are trying to keep everything to 2 minutes. We appreciate what you've been saying. We have several other people that want to speak according to Anthony's list. As long as those folks are still interested in speaking, we'd like to hear what else you have to say. But if we could do that via email to Anthony, and we can get that out to the group to respond. If you have any questions, we'd very much appreciate it. But we do need to move on to the other folks that would like to speak today.
Well, thank you for your indulgence.
Thanks, Paul.
Josh.
Okay. Next on the list requesting was Mr. John Halash. I may have mispronounced that name, and I do apologize. Going once. Okay, next is Margaret Harrington Tamulonis from Burlington. Is she here? Okay. Next, these are just people who requested to speak that we have not heard from yet. The next person is Nancy Rice. Nancy, are you here? Please remember to unmute your line. If you're tied in via phone, please press *6. Okay. Last on the list, we have Mr. Chris Williams. Chris, I know you were tied in before. Hopefully you're still here.
Oh, okay. I already spoke earlier in the meeting.
Okay. 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 Well, that's the list of people who had requested speaking. I guess the next question would be: is there anyone else from the public who wishes to comment at this time? Take yourself off of mute and go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Who is this?
Nancy Rice.
Oh, hi, Nancy. Okay.
Hi. I was on your list, but I had trouble unmuting. My name is Nancy Rice, and I'm with the Vermont Yankee Decommissioning Alliance.
And I urge NDCAP to continue having in-depth discussions about dealing with the high-level nuclear waste of Vermont Yankee. To me, it's unbelievably dangerous to ship that through our cities and towns across our country to the consolidated storage sites in New Mexico and Texas, joining thousands of other shipments over the next 40 years as other nuclear plants are shuttered, since accidents are almost certain to occur over that time. Any accidents would likely endanger our citizens with radiation leaks likely to cause cancer and other health problems. In addition, I would point out that if Vermont Yankee waste goes to the CIS facilities in New Mexico and Texas, those locations are not that far away from Sandia Labs at Los Alamos, New Mexico. So I hope not, but it is not inconceivable that at some point in time, the high-level waste stored there might be reprocessed for possible use in the manufacture of nuclear weapons, if that is authorized by the government. If that happened, to me, that would be totally unacceptable. It would bring us full circle, since nuclear power was originally produced to provide fuel for the production of nuclear weapons. So I certainly hope that doesn't happen. Anyway, for these reasons, I urge NDCAP and the NRC to decide that Vermont Yankees high-level waste be kept on site in Vernon, where it was produced, in their hardened dry casks of steel and concrete, and those casks should be surrounded by earthen berms and continuously monitored for the protection of the surrounding communities. That also they would be accessible to be reloaded into more robust casks if that becomes necessary. In addition, the nearby towns should also be monetarily compensated for being put in this situation until a scientifically based permanent burial storage location is found, and then move to that location. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay. Just once again, either Jeanette Baer, Brian Campbell, John Halash, Margaret Harrington. Also, here's a name I missed. Ms. Shania Casper.
Yeah, this is Shana Casper. Thanks. Yeah, I had got the confirmation and was just was waiting. But I actually would like for May Hanlon to go first. So take it away, May.
Yeah, hi. I'm just gonna read my statement first, and then I'll pass the floor to Shana if that's fine. So yeah, my name is May Hanlon. I'm from Iron Pond, Vermont, and I'm an intern with Community Action Works, formerly known as Toxics Action Center. I'm calling on NDCAP to ensure that the site and nuclear waste is handled with safety, good science, and environmental justice in mind. At Community Action Works, we believe that environmental threats are big, but the power of well-organized community groups is bigger. That's why we work side by side with everyday people to confront those who are polluting and harming the health of our communities. We partner with the people who are most impacted by environmental problems, who are often Black, Brown, Indigenous, communities of color, and poor communities, training them with the know-how anyone would need to make change in their own backyard. Because when neighbors know how to make change, you can build the power to transform your world. We cannot deal with Vermont's environmental burden by pushing it onto already overburdened communities. Pushing our nuclear waste onto a poor Indigenous community across the country without their consent is a clear violation of environmental justice. The communities proposed to take this nuclear waste, hundreds of thousands of miles across the country, is already a national sacrifice zone for radioactive contamination. This proposal does not have community support, and so this process is unconsensual and undemocratic. Vermont should not add to the pollution burden on this community. In addition to the environmental and health concerns of storing this waste in Texas, there's also significant concern about transporting this nuclear waste. The cars shipping this waste across the country are a mobile Chernobyl ready to happen. We cannot put this danger on the road. Instead, we have an obligation to keep our waste on site in long-term consolidated interim storage. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, May. Yeah, and my name's Shana Casper, and I live in Montpelier, and I'm the Vermont State Director with Community Action Works. And I'll just kind of finish off our statement, and then I'm also submitting written statements as well. We need safety to be paramount in any plan or strategy to deal with the long-lived waste problem that Vermont Yankee has created. Vermont Yankee has a long history of devastating environmental impacts, and we have many serious health and safety and environmental concerns. And we must take a smart and scientific risk-based approach for dealing with Vermont Yankee's waste. While Vermont Yankee wasn't designed to store spent nuclear fuel, we must update the site to best standards of consolidated interim storage in Vernon. Because meanwhile, we're in the midst of climate chaos. As we meet, the sky here in Montpelier is still pretty smoky from forest fires on the West Coast. We've seen once-in-a-lifetime floods in Vermont multiple times in my 30 years here. And we need to have on-site storage that's as safe as possible for the coming floods and unnatural disasters to come. We urgently need to dramatically alter our energy system to move to clean, local, renewable energy, replacing power generators like the old, dangerous, and polluting Vermont Yankee nuclear reactor with innovative, safe, and affordable solutions to make sure that we're never in this conundrum again. And the question of what to do with our spent nuclear fuel has plagued the U.S. since before the country's first commercial nuclear power plant was even up and running. We must commit to 100% renewable energy, environmental justice, and incentivize green infrastructure solutions while protecting our most vulnerable communities. So because of these and other concerns, we're calling on NDCAP to ensure that this site and nuclear waste is handled with safety, good science, and environmental justice in mind. So thank you for your time.
Okay. Just going back to the list of people requesting opportunity to comment. Once again, calling Jeanette Baer or Brian Campbell. John Halash or Margaret Harrington Tamilonis. And lastly, Mr. Chris Williams.
Okay. As I said, Tony, I've already spoken tonight, so I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, Chris. I had not realized that was you. I thought that was someone else just repeating. Okay. So you're set. I do not see anyone with hands raised requesting to speak at this time. Actually, Deb Katz, are you trying to say something right now?
No, it's all right. Sorry,
okay.
I was actually waving at someone else in the room, and it wasn't to speak. I've spoken enough, and I want to thank you for the opportunity that you've given us tonight.
Okay, so with that, I guess it's back to you, Josh.
Thanks, Tony. We will move on to the status report of the Vermont NDCAP legislation.
Okay, I guess, Sarah, that would be you at this point. I think you're the only state rep here this evening.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate that Senator McDonald and I know that Representative Sibilia she was juggling two different meetings. It's not looking as if this piece of legislation is going to make it across the finish line, but is being determined by the Senate, and we're heading into our last week this week. And anything could happen. So I've reached out to our senators, and I think others on the panel have reached out to the Senate Pro Tem. And as people know, the COVID, the priority in this last session has been passing the budget and COVID-related legislation and a number of high priorities. So I'm not sure if it's going to make it across the finish line, which is Laura and I have worked pretty hard to try to make that happen. So if things change, I will certainly update the group. I wish I had something different to report.
Thank you, Sarah. We will move on to the panel annual report outline.
Okay, and that comes back to me. Hopefully everyone can now see on the screen. I have put up an outline that I plan on using to begin drafting the panel's annual report. It's very similar to last year's. I don't think I changed any of the section headings, but some of the details have changed. What will likely be in those reports, in those sections, no surprise, has evolved a little bit this year based on this year's discussion. So hopefully panel members have had an opportunity to look at this particular outline, and I would say rather than me just run through it, do people have questions on what I provided?
Tony, this is Chris Campany. I think it looks great.
Okay, thank you for that.
I believe, Chair, it looks good to me.
Okay. Does anyone have a question on any of the specific items on this right now? My target would be to have a report. Well, it will depend on when the next meeting is scheduled, but I would target mid-November, late November to get a first draft together, assuming this is what people want.
You need a motion to accept this?
Rather than a motion, can I just suggest that if there's no disagreement, that we agree by consensus so we can dispense with a roll call vote?
Okay by me.
I'm good with that.
I am too.
Okay.
I'm good with that. Thank you.
If there's any objections, state now. Otherwise, we'll assume that the panel is all in favor. Okay, we're moving on.
Could I just ask a question, Josh?
Go ahead, sir.
Sure. It's for Tony. Tony, what is I know this is the outline, and then we work up a draft. What is the timeline for this? And can we get it for the next draft? Would it coincide? Would it coincide with our next meeting, or would it seems like our next meeting might be later than you'd need for moving this forward?
Well, that is up to you. The only direction that I have is this report does need to be filed by January 15th of next year. So this will partly depend on when the panel plans on meeting next. I can certainly focus on getting as much of this report prepared as possible in a short period of time. Obviously, some things like meeting highlights, for example, if we have a meeting in November or December and I put a first draft together in October, obviously I won't have information about those meetings. So this is something that can be addressed as the panel now discusses when you want to meet next.
Yeah, because
I think the best timeline to meet next is going to be early December.
So I would just have a request, if we could get this more than with a little bit of lead time so that we can have some time to digest it. Like if you could get it to us a week before the meeting, that would be helpful if that's possible, Tony, just so that we can give you some really more substantive feedback.
Okay. If I was with everything on the plate for tonight's meeting, I was anticipating that there might be 2 more meetings of the panel between now and the end of the year.
Well, that might be.
I can if we're talking meeting in early December, I would target having a draft together. Absolutely no later than mid-November, really.
So Tony, as we look at the next agenda item, it's establishing our last meeting of 2020 and into 2021, which we need to do election of officers as well. I would be aiming at probably December 7th or 8th, which would be a Monday or a Tuesday in December. Can I get some feedback from the panel on that?
That sounds right to me, Josh.
Yeah, I like those
Probably
dates as well.
good for me.
This is Chris Camp. I just have to avoid the 8th. I've got my executive board that night.
Sorry,
But you
Josh,
guys can meet without me too. That's fine.
Josh, can you just repeat those dates one more time?
December 7th or 8th.
Thank you.
And this is, can I make a suggestion about the annual report?
Please.
Sure.
We've seen this format for several years now. My suggestion would be for Tony, when he can, to go ahead and do a solid draft, send it to the panel for people to comment back to him individually, not reply to all. These tend not to be, we're not breaking news with these annual reports. They're basically a report on what we've done. And that way everybody will have had a chance to review it and get comments back to Tony ahead of the meeting. And then when we're at the meeting, it should make the process of review of it much quicker. Because it's not like there's any surprises to the format or frankly, the information contained within it. So I just think that would be helpful to everybody involved with the drafting and review of this thing.
I think this is Sarah. That sounds like a good process to me too.
So from what I'm hearing, December 7th, which is a Monday, is our next target date.
Yes. Oh, except Bill has a conflict.
Okay, then let it be so. December 7th will be our next meeting date.
And I would shoot for I would just like to respectfully suggest that we shoot for a target duration of that meeting of no more than an hour and a half, preferably even an hour. In my experience with these kind of Zoom best practices, if you go more than an hour, it gets really challenging for folk.
I agree. We've obviously haven't been meeting as regularly as we can, and we've had a lot of different issues that we had to get through today, and a lot of public participation, and this one went longer than what we would typically like, but we got things done that we need to get done. Everybody got to say their piece, and we appreciate everybody's input and everything that was said today, for sure.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Sarah.
May I add to my report from earlier? I would, at a moment when it makes sense, I just got a text from Laura.
Absolutely. I don't think we're going to work into 2021 tonight because I think everybody's brains are fried. We can talk about 2021 at the next meeting and figure out those early 2021 meetings. So we're going to move to the general public comments to the panel, and you can add on to your report during this time, and then we'll move to the general public after.
So thanks, Josh. I just wanted to flesh out my response a little bit about the legislation. While the bill that we had proposed that was informed by NDCAP, it was mainly to change some of the composition of the panel, but also with funding from NorthStar. While the legislation did not go through, I just want to be clear that it's my understanding that NorthStar is still willing to support financially support the panel up to $35,000, and it's our intention, if Laura and I are reelected, that we will reintroduce the legislation at the beginning of the next biennium. So I just wanted to kind of flesh out the picture for people who might be listening. Thank you.
Corey, if you're trying to say something, you're muted.
My apologies. If Sarah was looking for confirmation from NorthStar, that is affirmative. We agree with the comment she just supplied.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other general public comments to the panel before we end our evening?
Josh, this is Tony again. If there are no public comments, I would like to add something. I have a couple of thank yous that I would like to publicly state.
Go ahead, Tony.
Okay. I have been assisted this evening by Michelle LaPearl, who is another public service department staff member. She graciously volunteered to assist me, and she's been alerting me when there are messages coming up in the chat function to make certain that I am aware of that. So, and also Michelle does a lot of the website maintenance for the NDCAP website. So even though I effectively write a specification of what needs to go there, Michelle is the person who implements this, and I just want to thank her for her assistance in that. Also, I did ask Gerald Noyes to kind of keep track of things as well, since it appears the way Teams is set up that state employees can follow what's going on. I see that David Pearson is holding up a sheet of paper. I don't know, David, are you trying to get my attention? Okay, David,
Sorry,
you're
Tony,
on mute.
that was me reading something.
Oh, okay. Okay.
My apologies.
Okay, I had someone do that to me at another meeting that their connection was collapsing, and that's the way they could get my attention. But other than that, folks, if anyone here, if you do have feedback on how the meeting ran this evening, Microsoft Teams, this is the first time I've used it to this extent, and using it for a large meeting is a little bit different than just bringing 3 or 4 people or even 10 people in. But from my end, it looks like it ran well, but certainly it's you folks who should let me know that. Also, I know there have been a number of comments coming up in the meeting chat, which I I should be able to save, but folks, if you had something very pressing that you wanted to, that you had sent in the meeting chat and you want to make certain that it gets to me, do email me at the psd.ndcap@vermont.com email address to assure that I do have that. And that's all I have. So thank you, Josh, for the time.
All right, very good, folks. I think we're at the point where we can close up our meeting for the evening. I appreciate all your work, Tony, in improving the technology and how the meeting runs. And as far as I can tell, we are 2 minutes ahead of our agenda to adjourn this meeting.
Lissa has her hand up, so I don't know.
I just wanted to suggest that we consider a motion to withdraw our support for consolidated interim storage, so we are not taking a political position as NDCAP members, and that that discussion potentially come up at an issues committee meeting, which could be held before the next general meeting in December. And I would suggest that we have such a meeting, if possible, sometime in mid-November.
Yes, as tradition, we will have a committee meeting prior to the next NDCAP meeting in December 7th. And it looks like Sarah, you have your hand up as well.
I'm all set. I'm all set. Sorry.
Bob Leach, you have your hand up?
Bob, you're still muted.
Motion to adjourn. Sorry.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, unmute yourself and say aye, please.
Aye.
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 All right, sounds like a majority to me, folks. Thank you very much. And we have adjourned at exactly 9:25, which was the end of our agenda. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you in December.